Of course, when we open the rebar special data, we see that the third property is the rebar actual length. This refers to the length of the rebar in front of us, the rebar actual length. Whenever we make any changes to any of the lengths or shapes of the segments in the configuration rebar, this changes along with me. If I change this point, whether it's the start, the end, or the directional point, we'll notice what happens as a result. All these numbers, as you can see, change the actual length I have available. But for example, if I drew a rebar like this, I can also control the value of the actual length by entering this number myself, manually, instead of relying on automatic calculations. For example, I can tell it that I want it to be 2000, and we'll see that this value is entered into the straight part. So if, for example, the number that came up was 1999, I would like to set this number to 1980, for example. And I want to set this number to a whole number. For example, I have a solution. Either I drag this grip to the spot where I want to set it, or I enter the number directly, 2000. Where does this number go? It doesn't go into the hooks, nor does it go into the extra length. No, it goes into the straight part. We need to pay attention to this point. Alright, if you enter an input for length, what will it do? It will stretch your section to that value. Okay, there's another useful thing that I can also use to help me adjust my length, which is this red grip right here on the side of the device. This is in fact the adjust length grip. If I click on it now, my length is 1550 and some fraction. If I click on it, it will show me at the bottom in the command, adjust configuration rebar length to ends. What does that mean? It means the distance we're going to adjust will go to the ends, which right now are at the hooks, because right now it's telling me 1550. How much do you want it to be? I'll tell it I want it to be, for example, 1500, so I'll reduce it. I'll find that my length has actually become 1500. And this means the rebar is positioned correctly in its place. I heard this talk in the verse in the hooks that I have with me. It reduced the value of these hooks so that my total length reaches 1500. I'll say no. Open it again. It will tell me your length is 1500. I'll say no, I want it to be 2000. It will tell me that if I enter a number now, it will subtract that number from 1500 and divide it by 2. And it's supposed to start adding that value to the right hook and the left hook. What happened is that the resulting number made the hook length exceed its maximum value, which is the maximum hook. So it gave me a message saying that this hook is greater than the maximum value, and the other hook is also greater than the maximum value. And then it set their hooks. But actually my rebar can't exceed 1769. It can't exceed that length. I wanted to tell it to make it exactly 2000, but it still refused to exceed that length. Of course, if I had disabled keep rebar inside and allowed the hook to extend outside, it would have been fine, no problem. And I activated this option and set it to 2000. Now we'll see in the view that the rebar is actually 2000 in length because it's no longer restricted by the concrete section in front of me. So now I can pull the bar or the hooks outside the section that I drew. Yes, of course, as we've already said several times before. In the cross-section data, if I change the mode so that I set it specifically to keep inside for my hooks, this ensures that they will always stay inside the concrete section as required. And of course, again, as we mentioned earlier, here it says adjust to ends on the screen. If I click skip or simply exit the command at this point, nothing will happen. What does that mean exactly? So now, this is the L and this is the L, so the distance it calculates. What does it do? It takes the actual length and checks the length you entered, subtracts them from each other, and divides the result by 2. The distance that was divided by 2 is then added to both of my ends. If my end was L, it will either add to this side or subtract from it, and do the same on the other side. And if it was straight like this, it will also add to this side and to the other side. And if it was Z-shaped, it will add to the X distance, or to this distance, or to that distance, and so on, in each case as needed, depending on the situation. So this is also something we need to pay attention to. So, for example, in this particular case, I would come and tell it, for instance, that instead of 1360, I actually want it to be 1500. Okay, we check the distance, and indeed it's now set to 1500, and we see that it has adjusted here by a certain value, which was added to the straight part, meaning it either stretched or increased the straight section here, and in the extra part I have here, and in the end I achieved my required length. So as we saw, I changed my setting from LL to Z straight, and when I executed my command, it added them to my ends, that is, the extra part of the Z and the straight length at the bottom.